How would you describe the difference between being active and being somewhat active? Today's survey mini lesson comes courtesy of an animal shelter survey where they ask about how active you are so they can match you with a good pupper, which is so cute, and I love that they're doing it. But spoiler, I don't think they're making the best matches based on activity level. Here's why. Essential part of a good survey is that when you're reading the question and making your answer choice, you're understanding that language the same way as everyone else who's taking the survey. And most importantly, the way that the person who created the survey thinks you're going to understand the language. How are you going to know if people are understanding your question differently? It seems like there would always be that risk, right? Sure, like there always is a little bit of that risk, but you make it worse when you use unclear language. When your questions aren't specific, you make it more likely that everyone who looks at that survey is going to understand it in a different way. And the way they understand it is going to change how they answer the question, which means when you get the information from the survey, you don't actually really know what it means because people are answering all kinds of different things based on their interpretation of the question. If you're still confused, fear not, because I have an example. So I'm taking this survey to help the shelter better understand the type of dog that would be right for me, which I love that they do this. And I get to this thing about activity level. And actually first, just let me ask you, how would you describe the difference between active and somewhat active? Because for me, I would think if someone was like, how active are you? And I'm like, somewhat active. I would think that's less active than active. But if you look at their answer choices, they order it from most active to least active, and it's very active, somewhat active, active, somewhat inactive, inactive. So somewhat active, based on their rankings, is more active than active. That's confusing. That's confusing to me. Whereas the opposite, inactive, I think it works. If I say I'm somewhat inactive, I would think that's less inactive than inactive. But you see, even just based on the number of times I'm having to say active in this sentence, that this is confusing. This is not a good question. In this instance, y'all, it matters for the dogs, because if people are reading this and they're I'm somewhat active, meaning they're only a little bit active, they're getting matched with a dog who requires more activity than if they had just said they were active. That's a problem. Can we all agree that that's a problem? There are a lot of answer choices that I see like this, where they put a descriptor, so very or somewhat, in front of some of the words, but not all of them. Generally, I would avoid doing that. Give everything a descriptor, or you can treat the one without a descriptor as a middle ground. Let me show you an example. So you could do something like, how active are you? Very active, active, not active. That's actually my favorite. I see this with usefulness too. It's very useful, it's not useful. Because personally, if it's you're not active or not useful, I don't really care about oh my gosh, this was so not useful. Whatever. If it's not useful, it's not useful. Whereas I do actually care about the difference between something being positive and super positive. But that's one option. You could also go the route of not active, a little active, somewhat active, very active. And some people who are super strict might be oh, but what's the difference between a little and somewhat? You could ask that and be no, I need to make this even more clear. And I would support you in that. But I don't have an issue with a little versus somewhat, personally. But do you see how these are both much more clear? So if you're trying to match me with a dog where we're gonna share activity levels, I want you to use really clear, specific language, or ask for minutes. How many minutes am I willing to walk outside a day? You know what I mean? Get super specific like that. Definitely don't do something that is confusing like this. This is a bad question, and it makes me sad because it does have real world implications. It matters that we ask better questions. It matters that we're clear, that we're specific, that we're precise with our language. It makes a big difference. It gets better data. It allows people and organizations to make better decisions. Ask better questions. Surveys are everywhere, and they are so poorly done.